when Nathan Foster stood up in the middle of the quarterly town hall, pointed straight at me, and fired me in front of 200 people. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because he didn't know I'd already written the invoice that would gut his entire bonus pool. And by the time he figured it out, I was long gone, watching the wire hit my account from a rooftop bar. So sit tight, because you're about to learn how the quiet ones get even. My name is Rachel Porter, and I'm about to tell you how a single clause in a contract I signed 6 years ago became the most expensive mistake my former boss ever made. The conference room was packed that Tuesday morning in March. Quarterly town halls at Crestfall Innovations were always theatrical affairs. Nathan loved his spotlight moments. He'd strut around the front of the room like he was giving a TED Talk, gesturing wildly at PowerPoint slides filled with buzzwords like synergistic optimization and disruptive scalability. But this time felt different. There was tension crackling in the air like static before a thunderstorm. I sat in my usual spot, third row from the back, laptop balanced on my knees, half listening to Nathan's opening remarks about Q4 performance metrics. My mind was elsewhere, calculating timelines and reviewing contract clauses I'd memorized years ago. The Ferrex deal was about to close, $40 million over 5 years, the biggest contract in Crestfall's history, and Nathan had no idea what was coming. Before we dive into our growth projections, Nathan announced, his voice carrying that particular edge I'd learned to recognize over the years, I need to address some organizational restructuring that's been weighing on my mind. Several people shifted in their seats. Restructuring was corporate speak for layoffs, and everyone knew it. But I remained perfectly still, my fingers hovering over my keyboard as if I was taking notes. Because I was about to become the star of Nathan's little show, and I wanted to remember every detail. Building a successful company means making tough decisions. Nathan continued, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. Sometimes that means letting go of people who've become obstacles to our growth trajectory. Here it comes, I thought. The moment I'd been preparing for longer than Nathan could possibly imagine. Rachel Porter, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Please stand up. I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately, and rose from my chair. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me, but I kept my focus on Nathan. His face was flushed with the kind of righteous anger that men like him wear when they think they're delivering justice. Rachel's been with us for 6 years, Nathan announced to the room. And I want to be transparent about why we're parting ways. Despite numerous opportunities to contribute meaningfully to our growth, she's consistently failed to deliver results that align with our company values. More importantly, she's actively resisted initiatives that could have accelerated our market position. The room was dead silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming, could feel the uncomfortable energy of people witnessing something they wished they weren't seeing. A few of my colleagues were staring at their hands, unable to meet my eyes. Effective immediately. Nathan continued. Rachel's employment with Crestfall Innovations is terminated. HR will coordinate the transition of her responsibilities to team members who are more aligned with our vision. And there it was. 6 years of work. 6 years of building relationships and developing strategies. Dismissed in front of everyone I'd worked alongside. Nathan stood there looking satisfied, like he'd just solved a particularly complex equation. But I just smiled. Thank you for the opportunity, Nathan, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'll collect my things and be out within the hour. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, and I could feel the weight of confused stares following me. They were wondering why I wasn't angry, why I wasn't defending myself, why I looked almost pleased. If they only knew. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. 6 years earlier, when Crestfall Innovations was nothing more than a dream and a rented desk in a co-working space in downtown Seattle. I was 30 years old, coming off a bruising experience at my previous job where I'd learned some hard lessons about corporate politics and the importance of reading every line of every contract. When Nathan and his co-founder Jake approached me about joining their startup, I was intrigued but cautious. They were building something in the clean energy data space, developing analytics platforms that could help utility companies optimize their renewable energy portfolios. The technology was solid, the market opportunity was enormous, and Nathan had the kind of charismatic pitch that could make investors write checks on the spot. But I'd been burned before by charming founders who promised equity and recognition while taking credit for other people's work. So when they offered me the position of Senior Strategic Partnerships Lead, a fancy title for someone who would be responsible for finding and closing the big deals that would make or break the company, I had some conditions. I want my compensation structure to reflect the value I bring. I told Nathan during our final interview. We were sitting in a coffee shop near the co-working space, laptops and business plans scattered across a wobbly table. Of course, Nathan said, flashing that $1 million smile. We're all about recognizing contribution here. I want a base salary that's competitive, but more importantly, I want commission on any deals I originate and close. Not just assist with, deals that I personally initiate and see through to completion. Nathan waved his hand dismissively. Sure, we can work something out. 3% of the total contract value, I continued, payable in full upon deal closure or upon termination of my employment, whichever comes first. That got his attention. 3%, that's pretty aggressive. The deals I close will be worth millions, I replied. If I generate $40 million in revenue, 3% is fair compensation for that level of impact. Nathan looked at Jake, who shrugged. They were so focused on getting the right talent in the door that they weren't thinking about the long-term implications of commission structures. Fine, Nathan said. But that's only for deals you personally originate. If you're working on something that came through our existing channels, standard commission rates apply. Agreed, I said. But I want it in writing, with very specific language about what constitutes origination and completion. And that's how Clause 12.4 was born, buried on page 7 of an employment contract that Nathan barely skimmed before signing. He was too busy dreaming about IPOs and acquisition offers to worry about commission structures for individual employees. The clause read, employee shall receive commission equal to 3% of total contract value for any client relationship personally originated and developed by employee, regardless of team involvement in final negotiations. Commission shall be payable in full within 30 days of contract execution or upon termination of employment, whichever occurs first, with no conditions or offsets. It was ironclad language, reviewed by my personal attorney before I signed anything. Nathan's signature was right there on the bottom of the page, making it legally binding. I had no idea then that this single paragraph would eventually become worth more than most people's annual salaries. The early days at Crestfall were exactly what you'd expect from a startup. Long hours, constant pivoting, and the kind of manic energy that comes from people who believe they're changing the world. We grew from 10 employees to 25 in the first year, secured our Series A funding, and moved into a real office space with actual conference rooms and a kitchen that didn't require exact change. Nathan was in his element during this period. He had the vision, the presentation skills, and the ability to make investors believe that Crestfall was the next big thing in clean energy technology. But as the company grew, so did his ego. I started noticing small things first. How he'd casually appropriate ideas from team meetings, presenting them to the board as his own insights. How he'd take credit for successful client presentations that other people had prepared. How he'd somehow always be the face of the company when good news was announced, but mysteriously absent when difficult conversations needed to happen. The pattern became clear during our second year. I'd spend weeks developing a proposal for a potential client, researching their needs, crafting custom solutions, and building relationships with their decision-makers. Then Nathan would swoop in for the final presentation, charming everyone with his charisma and closing the deal with a handshake and a smile. Great work on the Peterson Energy deal, he'd tell me afterward, as if he was graciously acknowledging my supporting role in his triumph. But I wasn't looking for recognition or praise. I was building something much more valuable, a meticulous record of every deal I touched, every client relationship I developed, and every piece of intellectual property I created. My insurance folder grew steadily. Email chains proving I'd initiated contact with prospects. Meeting notes showing I'd led strategy sessions. Contracts and NDAs with my signature prominently featured. Calendar entries documenting every client call, every site visit, every presentation I'd given. Most importantly, I was learning to work the system Nathan had created. He wanted to be the front man, the public face of every success. Fine. That meant he wasn't paying attention to the details, wasn't reading the fine print, wasn't tracking the actual mechanics of how deals got done. While Nathan was giving interviews to trade publications and speaking at industry conferences, I was building an empire of client relationships that existed entirely under his radar. Which brings me to Marcus Chen, the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Ferrex Utilities. The email came on a Thursday morning in February, 3 months before Nathan would fire me in front of the entire company. It was a simple cold outreach. Marcus had seen some of Crestfall's case studies and was interested in learning more about our predictive analytics platform. Thanks for reaching out, I replied within an hour. I'd be happy to set up a call to discuss how our solutions might fit Ferrex's infrastructure optimization goals. When I mentioned the inquiry to Nathan during our weekly pipeline review, his reaction was predictable. Ferrex? He barely looked up from his phone. They're old-school utility guys. They're not going to pay premium prices for analytics software they don't understand. Don't waste too much time on tire kickers. I think there might be real opportunity there. I pressed. They're under regulatory pressure to optimize their renewable energy investments. Our platform could help them demonstrate ROI to state utility commissions. Nathan shrugged. If you want to spend your time educating prospects instead of closing deals, that's your choice. But don't expect me to get excited about it until I see a real budget and a real timeline. Which was exactly what I was hoping he'd say. My first call with Marcus lasted 2 hours. He was sharp, asking detailed questions about our algorithms, our data sources, and our track record with similar-sized utilities. More importantly, he was asking the right questions, the kind that suggested Ferrex wasn't just exploring options, but was actively looking for a solution to some very specific challenges. We're dealing with a perfect storm, Marcus explained during that initial conversation. Federal tax incentives are driving massive renewable energy investments, but the utilities commissions are demanding more sophisticated reporting on efficiency and ROI. We need predictive analytics that can help us optimize our energy portfolio while demonstrating compliance with new regulations. What's your timeline? I asked. Ideally, we'd like to have a pilot program running by the end of this quarter, with full implementation beginning in Q3. But that's only if we find the right partner. I felt that familiar flutter of excitement that comes when you realize you're talking to a serious buyer with a real budget and a genuine need. But I kept my voice steady and professional. That's definitely doable. Why don't I put together some materials specific to Ferrex's situation, and we can schedule a more detailed conversation with your technical team? That would be perfect, Marcus said. But I should mention, this isn't just about the pilot program. If the initial implementation goes well, we're looking at a 5-year rollout across our entire infrastructure network. We're talking about significant investment. How significant? $40 million, give or take. I managed to keep my poker face during the call, but after I hung up, I sat back in my chair and did some quick math. 3% of $40 million was $1.2 million. More money than Nathan probably made in a year. And according to the contract I'd signed 6 years earlier, every penny of it would be mine if I could prove I'd originated and developed the relationship. Over the next 3 months, I became Marcus Chen's best friend. I flew to Ferrex's headquarters in Denver twice, spending full days with their technical team, understanding their current systems, and identifying specific ways our platform could solve their problems. I worked nights and weekends developing custom presentations, building mock-ups of reports that would make their compliance officers happy, and creating implementation timelines that would meet their aggressive deadlines. Nathan was barely aware any of this was happening. He was too busy managing our Series B funding round and preparing for a potential acquisition offer from a larger energy consulting firm. When he bothered to ask about my pipeline, I'd give him vague updates about continuing to develop the Ferex opportunity. And he'd nod absently and move on to something else. Which was perfect. Because while Nathan was distracted by bigger picture strategic concerns, I was building an unshakable foundation for the biggest deal in Crestfall's history. By May, Marcus and I had worked through every technical detail, every compliance requirement, and every integration challenge. His technical team had run our demo environment through exhaustive testing. His legal team had reviewed our standard contract language. His finance team had approved the budget. All that remained was the formal contract signing, which was scheduled for the first week of June. And that's when Nathan decided to insert himself into the process. "I think it's time I got involved with the Ferex deal," he announced during our Monday morning leadership meeting. "This sounds like it could be significant, and I want to make sure we're positioning ourselves correctly." "It's actually pretty far along," I replied carefully. "We're just waiting for final approvals from their board, and then we'll be ready to sign." Nathan's eyes lit up. 40 million over 5 years? That's the kind of deal that could change everything for us. I should be the one handling the final negotiations. "Marcus and I have already worked through all the negotiation points," I said. "Their legal team is comfortable with our standard terms, and their finance team has approved the budget. We're really just waiting for signatures at this point." But Nathan wasn't listening. He was already envisioning himself in front of the board of directors, presenting Crestfall's biggest contract win as evidence of his strategic leadership. "I'll take it from here," he said. "You've done good work getting us to this point, but I need to be the face of the relationship going forward." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear. I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I signed my employment contract, but a kind of grim satisfaction that Nathan was finally revealing himself to be exactly who I'd always known he was. "Of course," I said. "Whatever you think is best." But Nathan wasn't content with just taking over the final negotiations. Over the next 2 weeks, he systematically erased my involvement from the deal history. He scheduled calls with Marcus without including me. He created new presentation materials that featured his name instead of mine. He even went so far as to send an email to our entire sales team, announcing that he'd been personally managing the Ferex relationship and that the deal was a result of his strategic outreach efforts. The email was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. "I'm excited to announce that Crestfall has secured a major contract with Ferex Utilities, valued at 40 manors, over 5 years. This relationship represents months of strategic relationship building and technical consultation that perfectly demonstrates our team's ability to deliver enterprise-level solutions to complex client challenges." My name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the email. But Nathan made one crucial mistake. He was so focused on claiming credit for the deal that he forgot to actually read the documentation. Every email exchange between Marcus and me was still in our CRM system. Every presentation I'd created was still in our shared drive. Every NDA, every technical specification, every implementation timeline, all of it was still there with my name on it. And most importantly, the contract itself, the one that Marcus would sign in 2 weeks, still listed me as the primary point of contact, the account manager, and the person responsible for ongoing relationship management. Nathan could change the internal narrative all he wanted, but the legal documentation told a different story. The contract signing was scheduled for June 15th. Nathan flew to Denver personally, bringing along our head of sales and our CTO to make it feel like a proper corporate delegation. I wasn't invited. "You've done your part," Nathan told me the day before he left. "This is the kind of high-level relationship management that requires executive involvement." I nodded and smiled. I understand completely. What I didn't tell Nathan was that Marcus had called me the night before, confused about why he was suddenly dealing with different people after months of working exclusively with me. "I thought you were our primary contact," Marcus had said. "Is everything okay on your end?" "Everything's fine," I'd replied. "Nathan likes to personally handle the final stages of our biggest deals, but I'll still be your day-to-day contact for implementation and ongoing support." "Good," Marcus said. "Because honestly, you're the reason we're comfortable moving forward with this. You understand our needs better than anyone. The contract was signed on schedule. Nathan returned from Denver with a signed agreement and a massive ego boost. He immediately scheduled an all-hands meeting to announce the deal, positioning himself as the mastermind behind Crestfall's biggest success. But he also made another decision that would prove to be spectacularly stupid. I'm restructuring the partnerships team, Nathan announced to me privately the day after he returned from Denver. I want to create clearer accountability and better alignment with our growth objectives. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means you'll be transitioning off the Ferrex account. I'm moving you to our smaller clients, the ones that need more hands-on support. Marcus will be working directly with our sales ops team going forward. I kept my expression neutral. I see. Don't take it personally. Nathan continued. You did good work getting us to this point, but now we need to think about scaling our processes and making sure our biggest clients are getting executive-level attention. Of course, I said, whatever's best for the company. But privately, I was almost giddy with anticipation, because Nathan had just made the final move that would trigger everything I'd been building toward for 6 years. He'd terminated my involvement with a deal that I'd personally originated and developed. According to Clause 12.4 of my employment contract, that meant I was entitled to my full commission, 3% of the total contract value, regardless of whether I was still working on the account. Nathan had just accidentally triggered a $1.2 million payment that he had no idea was coming. I spent the next 2 months playing the role of the gracious team player. I transitioned my smaller accounts to other team members. I documented my processes and handed over my client relationships. I even helped train the sales ops team on the technical details of the Ferrex implementation. But I was also building my case. Every email I'd sent to Marcus was carefully archived. Every presentation I'd created was documented with timestamps and version histories. Every meeting I'd attended was logged in our CRM system. Every phone call was noted in our activity tracking software. Most importantly, I was working with my attorney, Madeline Quinn, a sharp-eyed partner at a boutique firm that specialized in employment law and contract disputes. This is a very strong position, Madeline told me during our consultation. The contract language is unambiguous, and you have extensive documentation proving you originated and developed the client relationship. The fact that you were removed from the account actually strengthens your case for commission payment. What about the timing? I asked. The contract says payment is due within 30 days of deal closure or termination of employment. Since they terminated your involvement with the account, you could argue that constitutes a form of constructive termination specific to this deal. Madeline explained. But honestly, it might be easier to just wait for them to fire you. What makes you think they're going to fire me? Madeline smiled. Because men like Nathan Foster don't keep people around who know where the bodies are buried. He's going to get paranoid about what you know and what you might do with that knowledge. Give it a few months, and he'll find an excuse to get rid of you. She was right, of course. Nathan's paranoia was already starting to show. He'd started excluding me from leadership meetings. He'd stopped copying me on emails related to strategic planning. He'd begun making subtle comments about legacy team members and the need to bring in fresh perspectives for the next phase of Crestfall's growth. I could see it building, the narrative that would eventually justify my termination. I was going to be positioned as someone who was holding the company back, someone whose contributions belonged to an earlier era of the business. Which brings us back to that Tuesday morning in March, and Nathan's theatrical performance in front of the entire company. After I walked out of the conference room, I went straight to my desk and began the process I'd been rehearsing in my mind for months. I opened my laptop and pulled up the employment contract I'd signed 6 years earlier. I took screenshots of Clause 12.4, highlighting the specific language about commission payments. Then I opened my insurance folder and began compiling evidence. Email chains with Marcus Chen, starting with his initial cold outreach and continuing through months of technical discussions and relationship building. Meeting notes from my trips to Denver. Presentation materials I'd created specifically for Ferrex's needs. NDA documents with my signature as the primary Crestfall representative. Finally, I opened a new email and began typing. Dear Madeline, Nathan Foster terminated my employment this morning during an all-hands meeting. Per our previous discussions, I'm ready to move forward with invoicing Crestfall for the commission owed under Clause 12.4 of my employment contract. Attached, you'll find documentation supporting my origination and development of the Ferrix Utilities relationship, as well as confirmation of the contract value and signing date. Please prepare and send the formal invoice for $1,200,000, payable within 30 days as specified in my employment agreement. Best regards, Rachel Porter. I hit send and closed my laptop. Then I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, said goodbye to the few colleagues who seemed genuinely sorry to see me go, and walked out of Crestfall Innovations for the last time. The drive home was strangely peaceful. I'd been carrying the weight of this plan for so long that actually executing it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I knew what was coming next. Nathan would probably spend the rest of the day telling people about his difficult but necessary decision to let me go. He'd position himself as the strong leader who'd made the tough choice to remove an obstacle to the company's success. But in about an hour, he was going to get an email that would change everything. I was making dinner when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Madeline's office number. "It's done," she said without preamble. I sent the invoice to Nathan Foster, with copies to the head of HR and the company's general counsel. The subject line is Commission Due, $200,000, and the body includes a detailed breakdown of the contract terms and supporting documentation. How long do you think it'll take them to respond? Oh, I'd say about 10 minutes. Nathan's probably reading it right now. She was right. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. This is Nathan. Call me." I deleted the message and poured myself a glass of wine. 20 minutes later, another text. "Rachel, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's discuss this like professionals." I deleted that one too. Then my phone rang. Nathan's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was exactly what I expected, a rambling mixture of confusion, anger, and barely contained panic. Nathan claiming he'd never agreed to such a ridiculous commission structure, threatening legal action, and demanding I call him back immediately to resolve this misunderstanding. I deleted the voicemail and turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Nathan had apparently spent the night cycling through every emotional stage from denial to rage to bargaining. But the message I was most interested in came from Jake, Nathan's co-founder and the closest thing Crestfall had to a voice of reason. "Rachel, I know Nathan handled your departure badly, but we need to talk about this commission claim. Can you call me today? I think we can work something out." I called Jake back around noon. "Jesus, Rachel," he said as soon as he picked up. "What the hell is going on?" Nathan's been pulling his hair out since yesterday afternoon. "I'm invoicing for commission I'm owed under my employment contract," I replied calmly. "It's all very straightforward. $1,200,000, are you serious? 3% of $40 million, the math is simple." There was a long pause. "Rachel, I don't think Nathan understood what he was agreeing to when he signed that contract." "That's not my problem, Jake. He signed it, it's legally binding, and I have extensive documentation proving I originated and developed the Ferrix relationship. But you can't seriously expect us to pay that much money. It would wipe out most of our cash reserves." Then maybe Nathan should have read the contract before he signed it. Another long pause. "What do you want, Rachel? What would it take to make this go away?" "I want the $1.2 million I'm owed paid within 30 days as specified in the contract. That's it." "That's not going to happen. We'd have to go to the board, explain how we ended up with this kind of liability, probably bring in outside counsel." "Then bring in outside counsel," I interrupted. "My attorney is Madeline Quinn at Hartwell & Associates. She's very experienced with employment contract disputes. I'm sure she'd be happy to discuss the matter with your legal team." I hung up and waited. By the end of the week, the story was spreading through Crestfall's office like wildfire. Someone had leaked the details of my commission claim. And suddenly everyone was talking about the golden handcuffs clause that Nathan had accidentally agreed to 6 years earlier. The company Slack was apparently buzzing with speculation. Who else had unusual clauses in their contracts? How many other expensive surprises were lurking in the fine print of old employment agreements? But the most damaging development was the growing realization that I really had been the one responsible for the Ferrex deal. Despite Nathan's efforts to rewrite history, too many people remembered my months of travel to Denver, my late nights preparing presentations, my detailed knowledge of Ferrex's technical requirements. Marcus Chen inadvertently confirmed the story when he called Crestfall's main number, asking to speak with me about an implementation question. When he was told I no longer worked there, he expressed surprise and asked who would be handling the account going forward. I thought Rachel was our primary contact. He told whoever answered the phone. She's the one who understands our needs. Is there some kind of transition plan? Word of that conversation spread quickly through the office, undermining Nathan's narrative that I'd been a peripheral player in the deal. Meanwhile, Madeline was building an airtight case. She'd subpoenaed email records, calendar entries, and CRM data proving my central role in developing the Ferrex relationship. She'd documented every presentation I'd created, every trip I'd taken, every technical call I'd led. Most importantly, she'd identified the specific language in the contract that made Nathan's commission obligation unavoidable. The beauty of this clause, she explained to me during one of our strategy sessions, is that it doesn't depend on subjective judgment about contribution or team collaboration. It's purely objective. Did you originate the relationship, and did you develop it to the point of contract execution? The documentation clearly shows that you did both. What about Nathan's argument that he was involved in the final negotiations? Irrelevant. The contract says, regardless of team involvement in final negotiations. He literally agreed to pay you, even if other people helped close the deal. 2 weeks after I'd been fired, Madeline received a call from Crestfall's outside counsel, a large corporate firm that specialized in defending companies against employment claims. They want to negotiate, she told me. They're offering $50,000 to settle and make this go away. $50,000? I laughed. That's not even 5% of what I'm owed. That's what I told them. But they seem to think you'll be reasonable if they make it sound like a generous offer. What did you tell them? I told them we'd consider any offer that starts with a 1 and has 6 zeros after it. The next offer was $250,000, then $500,000, then $750,000. Each time, Madeline would call me with the update, and each time I'd give her the same response. I want the full amount I'm owed, paid within the time frame specified in the contract. Meanwhile, Nathan was apparently having a complete meltdown. According to sources still inside the company, he'd been banned from making any public statements about the situation. The board had brought in crisis management consultants. There were whispers about his role in the company going forward. The final straw came when Jake called me directly, bypassing both attorneys. Rachel, you have to understand, paying you $1.2 million would seriously damage the company. We might have to lay off other employees. We might have to delay product development. You'd be hurting innocent people just to make a point. I'm not making a point, Jake. I'm collecting money I'm legally owed. But morally, don't lecture me about morality. I interrupted. Nathan fired me in front of 200 people after stealing credit for work I'd done for months. He tried to erase my contribution to the biggest deal in the company's history. He violated every principle of professional respect and basic human decency. And now you want me to feel bad about enforcing a contract he signed? That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying. You want me to subsidize Nathan's incompetence with my own money. You want me to accept being cheated because enforcing my rights would be inconvenient for you. There was a long silence. What if we fired Nathan? Jake said finally. What if we made changes to the leadership structure and found a way to bring you back? I don't want to come back, Jake. I want the money I'm owed, and I want to move on with my life. The board is meeting next week. If we can't find a solution, they might have to consider bankruptcy protection. I almost felt sorry for Jake. He was genuinely trying to save the company. and he was caught between Nathan's arrogance and my unwillingness to accept anything less than full payment. But I'd been planning this moment for too long to get sentimental now. "That's not my problem," I said. "I have a legally binding contract, and I intend to enforce it." The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon in April. Madeline called me with news that the board had voted to settle the claim in full rather than risk a protracted legal battle that could expose other liability issues. "They're also terminating Nathan's employment," she added. "Apparently, the board has lost confidence in his judgment and his ability to manage risk." "What about the company? Will they survive paying out $1.2 million fees?" "They'll survive. It'll hurt. But they have enough cash reserves to cover it." The board was more worried about the reputational damage of a public legal battle than the financial impact of settling. "When do I get paid?" "Next week. They want to wire the money directly to avoid any delays or complications." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. After 6 years of careful planning, meticulous documentation, and patient waiting, it was almost over. The wire transfer hit my account on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, reading the news on my laptop, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank app. Wire transfer received $200,000. I closed my laptop and walked outside. It was one of those perfect Seattle spring days. Clear skies, snow-capped mountains visible in the distance. The kind of weather that makes you remember why you live in the Pacific Northwest despite the rain. I called an Uber and gave the driver an address in Belltown. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on the rooftop terrace of a hotel bar, looking out over Elliott Bay, with a perfectly crafted cocktail in my hand. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Congratulations. I heard about the settlement. You played the long game better than anyone. Marcus." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Hope the implementation goes smoothly." Then I turned off my phone, finished my drink, and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I never posted about my departure on social media. I never sent a goodbye email to my former colleagues. I never wrote a blog post about toxic management or the importance of reading your employment contract. I just disappeared, $1.2 million richer and completely satisfied with the knowledge that sometimes the quiet ones really do get the last laugh. Nathan Foster learned the hard way that when you underestimate people, you better make sure you haven't given them the tools to destroy you. And Clause 12.4 of my employment contract turned out to be the most powerful tool I'd ever wielded. The best part, it was all completely legal. I didn't have to lie, cheat, or break any rules. I just had to be patient, thorough, and smart enough to read the fine print. 6 months later, I heard through the tech industry grapevine that Crestfall had been acquired by a larger consulting firm for significantly less than their previous valuation. The acquisition was positioned as a strategic merger, but everyone knew it was really a distressed sale. The $1.2 million they'd paid me, combined with the leadership chaos following Nathan's departure, had damaged their financial position enough to make them vulnerable. Jake reached out to me one more time, about a year after the settlement. He was starting a new company and wanted to know if I'd be interested in joining as a co-founder. "I learned a lot from what happened with Nathan," he said during our coffee meeting. "I understand now that the best partnerships are built on mutual respect and clear expectations." I appreciated the gesture, but I politely declined. I'd spent the past year consulting for mid-sized tech companies, helping them structure their partnership strategies and avoid the kinds of toxic dynamics that had defined my experience at Crestfall. The work was interesting, the clients respected my expertise, and I was making more money than I'd ever made as an employee. But more than that, I'd learned something valuable about myself during those 6 years of patient planning. I was better at playing the long game than I'd ever realized. I was better at reading people's weaknesses and waiting for the right moment to exploit them. And I was much better at protecting my own interests than I'd been when I started my career. The Ferrex deal, incidentally, was a massive success. Despite the chaos at Crestfall, the implementation went smoothly, and Ferrex ended up expanding their contract for an additional $20 million over 3 years. I occasionally got calls from Marcus, asking for technical advice or referrals to other consultants who could help with related projects. You know, he told me during one of these conversations, Nathan called me about 6 months ago, trying to get a reference for his new job. I told him I'd never actually worked with him, that you were our only real contact at Crestfall. What did he say? He got very quiet and hung up pretty quickly. I never found out what happened to Nathan after he left Crestfall. He'd disappeared from the Seattle tech scene completely, and none of our mutual connections seemed to know where he'd landed. Part of me was curious about whether he'd learned anything from the experience, whether losing his job and watching his company get sold had taught him anything about leadership or humility. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. The real lesson of this story isn't about revenge, though that's certainly how it felt in the moment when I watched that wire transfer notification appear on my phone. The real lesson is about the power of preparation, documentation, and understanding exactly what you're agreeing to when you sign a contract. Nathan made two critical mistakes that cost him everything. First, he underestimated me. He saw a quiet, competent employee who wouldn't cause trouble, and he assumed that meant he could treat me however he wanted without consequences. Second, he was careless with legal documents, signing contracts without reading them carefully and then forgetting what he'd agreed to. Those mistakes created an opportunity that I was prepared to exploit because I'd learned early in my career to protect myself. Every email saved, every meeting documented, every contribution tracked and recorded. Not because I was planning some elaborate revenge scheme, but because I'd been burned before by managers who took credit for my work. The commission clause in my contract wasn't a trap I'd set for Nathan. It was insurance I'd bought to make sure I got paid fairly for the value I created. The fact that it ended up being worth $1.2 million was just a testament to how much value I'd actually created over those 6 years. Looking back now, I can see that the whole experience taught me something important about power dynamics in corporate environments. The people who seem to have all the power, the charismatic leaders, the smooth talkers, the ones who are comfortable taking credit for other people's work, are often much more vulnerable than they appear. They're so focused on managing perceptions and controlling narratives that they forget to pay attention to the details that actually matter. Meanwhile, the people who seem powerless, the quiet ones, the ones who do the actual work, the ones who get overlooked in meetings, are often building something much more substantial. We're creating value, developing relationships, and documenting everything we do. And sometimes, when the stars align just right, all that careful preparation becomes incredibly powerful. The day I got fired was the worst and best day of my professional life. Worst because being humiliated in front of your colleagues is genuinely painful, regardless of what you know is coming next, but best because it was finally time to cash in 6 years of patient investment. Nathan thought he was removing an obstacle to his success. Instead, he triggered the largest single payout in Crestfall's history and set in motion the events that would ultimately cost him his job and his company. I still smile when I think about the look on his face when he pointed at me in that conference room. So confident in his righteousness, so certain that he was making a smart, strategic decision. He had no idea he was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his career. Sometimes the quiet ones really do get the last laugh. And sometimes, if you're very patient and very careful, that laugh can be worth exactly $1,200,000.